Hello and welcome to another episode of AAC Access All Areas. I'm Ruth Jones.
And I'm Ali Batty. And our question today is, what are the different reasons that we communicate?
Yeah, and we thought we might start today talking about an oldie but a goodie in terms of speech and language therapy models. It's something that I came across, I think, when I trained, and that is the means, reasons, and opportunities model. So it's usually visually created in three little circles, where they all cross over. And in the middle of that is like beautiful, harmonious communication moments. But in order to do that, we need the means for communication, which is in the kind of context of the conversations we're having, are AAC, but also that might be spoken language, that might be body language and facial expressions, it could be gesture, could be writing, drawing, loads of different means to communicate. We also need the opportunity, which is quite important with AAC as well, and particularly in that teaching phase, is thinking about who we're communicating with, when we're communicating, where we're communicating. Um, and then importantly, it's the reasons for communication. And that is something that I think there's a bit of legacy work going on within speech therapy and AAC generally, I think, particularly within our autistic community, to recognize, and there was a campaign, wasn't there? I can do more than request. And I
Um,
think there's something about those reasons for communication and that legacy of focusing on requesting and
mm,
just I
mm,
want something or I would
mm.
like something, please, so and putting phrases together like that. But actually, there are so many more reasons for us to communicate than just asking for what we want. If we think about our
Yes.
communication, there's so much more that we talk to people about in the day, isn't there?
Yes. Well, I often sort of like encourage people to think about what was the most meaningful interaction that you had today. And it's usually not about requesting something. It's not about sort of like ordering your coffee or making a choice between two things to wear or, you know, um, two things to watch on TV. It's usually something a bit more profound. And I think it's usually more about connection of like just sharing the moment together and sharing that feeling of that person really got me, really understood me in that
Mm.
moment. So yeah, like you, Ruth, I wish that we could just erase that whole legacy of AAC always starts with requesting, because we see that over and over, don't we? In schools, or we hear from maybe other speech and language therapists or people that we supervise, or I see it written all over EHCPs actually, that the
Yeah.
desired outcome is that this child will make a choice between two items, or they'll request something at snack time. And I just want to get a great big crayon and scribble all over it so that you can't see that anymore.
Oh, yeah. I think it's just that's a really common AAC practice, isn't it? That adults
Mm,
around a child, particularly a child who's an AAC user, will be like, right, I need to ask them what they want. This is that
mm,
opportunity for communication. And so the time and the place and the person that becomes the opportunity for communication is rounded around those points in the day. And then you see the means of communication, the AAC, then
mm,
put away when it's like, oh, the opportunity
yes.
is finished now, our communication time is finished. And I love it when I go into classrooms and I see AAC tools, whether that's communication books, boards, iPads, whatever it is, when I just see them out all over the
Yeah.
place. And I recognize
Mm,
there are challenges to that with supporting complex needs children in a space like, and keeping everybody's AAC together and safe is not always easy. But that sort of that concept that it's communication time and the
mm,
reason you want to communicate is to ask for what you want,
mm,
and then we'll put it away because communication time is finished and the only thing you
mm.
want to communicate for is a request.
Yeah.
And I actually think so much of the joy gets taken out of it. I'm like, food is
Yes.
so pleasurable and you're
Mm.
making kids
Ah,
ask for it
yes.
when you
Yes.
know it's what they want.
Yes, and I would be absolutely furious if my husband said, "No, you've got to ask nicely before I get a cup of tea." Like, that would not go well. So yeah,
Well, it's like
definitely.
when you
So the
it's like when you go to a
communication in. Oh,
restaurant.
sorry, Ruth.
No, I was just say it's like when you go to a restaurant, if you order your food and then you have to wait a bit longer, you start to
Mm.
get a bit antsy, don't
Yeah,
you? You're like, I'm kind of
yeah,
ready for it now. And I just think there is a barrier that we create to children
yeah,
having pleasurable experiences,
yeah.
particularly around food, when if a child's quality of life is impacted by their disability, for a
Mm.
lot of them, food is a real pleasure and a real joy. And
Yes,
so kind of
yes,
putting this barrier of you've got to ask for it before you can have this pleasurable, joyful
yeah.
experience feels just feels wrong. And I think
Mm.
actually then you could have the, oh, it's crunchy, it's spicy, it's
Mm.
yummy, let's have some more. And there's so much
Mm.
other language you can model in those situations. And I
Yes,
think
yes.
there's something, isn't there, about that legacy piece, that communication is taught in a behavioral way where
Mm.
we, as the communication partners, expect a response.
Mm.
And often a way to get that is to dangle the carrot that
Yes,
the child wants. So we teach it
yes.
by that kind of request and response. But actually, if we think about communication development and we think about where children's communication starts from,
Mm.
then grows into, it's not just about asking for the things they want. It's about
No,
seeking that connection and sharing
no.
those fun things. You know, when babies first learn to clap and they look around like, what just
Yes,
happened? Isn't that
yes.
exciting? You know, they moments.
Yes, and I always have a sort of visceral reaction to the term functional communication because we also read that a lot in reports or EHCPs. And I just kind of think, what is functional communication? If you're basing this on a typical young child, their communication is not very functional, is it? It's very non-functional for most of the time
Yeah.
because it's based on having fun and spontaneity and silliness and like spontaneous protests and being like a bit, disorganized, surprises coming left, right, and center. Not much of it is functional. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another term that I wish we could sort of get away from and really put the fun back into communication because communication is so much more messy and silly and we don't know what a child is going to say next, do we? You never know. You've got young children, Ruth. I bet you don't know what's going to come out of their mouths next.
No, no. The other day, he's 4 next week, and he came up to me in the middle of the swimming pool. We were sat upstairs watching his big sister swimming, and just came up and went, "I'm a gorilla. I eat poo." And I was like, "Okay," you know. And I just said, "Wow!" I said that was a funny thing to say because actually, it's just joy.
Yes.
It's just pure embarrassing for parents full joy. And
Yes.
that's the thing, isn't it? And I think we place this kind of presumption that, particularly for our autistic community, that they don't want to talk about those kind of things and share those kinds of things.
Mm,
And so therefore we focus on the requesting. And I think there's something about, you know, what if autistic non-speaking children want to talk about being a gorilla and eating poo?
mm, mm.
Why are we not giving them access to
Yeah.
words to do that? And recognizing that communication development is often different for autistic children and might lean into more of their special interests, or particularly
Mm,
if they're using
mm,
echolalia and gestalts. But equally, that sort of thinking about communication in a much broader way
mm,
over how do they tell us things are fun. And we might
mm,
see it in their body language, but
mm.
then that's one word and one
Yeah.
way, whereas we
Yeah.
could offer them lots of different language because is that excitement or is that fun
Yes.
or is it
Yes.
hilarious or is it a joke or is it like ha ha, all these different words. So while we can see in their body and their facial expressions that they're experiencing joy,
Mm,
what is actually the kind of words that we're giving them to communicate
mm.
that. And so if we're just, and they're the bits, aren't they, where I think we need to think about really the reasons for communication being broader than just a request
Yes.
for a thing. There could be a comment about, you know, I work with a little one who loves aeroplanes and loves trains and will go and watch the trains and watch the aeroplanes. And that communication, just to say, like, I can see it. I don't
Mm.
want it, but I can see
Yes.
it. It's in the sky.
Yes.
Like those
Yeah.
kinds of things, that content of language that is just
Yeah.
meaningful He doesn't want to
Yes,
request
yeah,
them. He might have done at home to get them to go out to watch them.
yes, yeah. But I just want to share a thought that's in my head. Yeah, and I remember there was a piece of research a long time ago that was saying that children who used AAC, their language was often interpreted as as a request, but it wasn't necessarily a request. So if a child was to say "mummy" at school, it was often interpreted as "oh, you want your mummy," but that child might just have been wanting to say, I'm thinking about mummy, or I wonder when mummy will be
Yeah.
coming, or, loads of different possible reasons to communicate, that weren't requesting, but it was limiting, children's communication to requesting.
Mm. Yeah, I think back again to another boy I worked with. This was years ago, and he would have been in my, if you read the Ruth then Spillman reports of the era, it would have been all about functional communication and requesting, and because that
Mm,
was what I knew and what I was trained in. And we were introducing him to an iPad.
mm,
And I was programming it, and he'd been really quite distressed. His teacher had called and said, "Can you just bring the iPad up? Like, I know it's not ready yet, but can you just bring it because we don't
mm,
know?" And he had like some vocalizations and been saying ba 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 like repeatedly, and they'd always, I can't quite recall the exact, whether he'd always said that and they'd always thought he meant his bedroom and that
mm,
he wanted to go back to his bedroom. And so we got the iPad and I just sat down, like he was sat on a beanbag with his sort of teacher behind him, giving lots of deep pressure and squeezes because he was kind of starting to regulate a little bit again. And he navigated and he said the bus. And the teacher
mm,
was like, "Oh, well, we were meant to go on the bus this morning, but we couldn't because of staffing, blah, blah,
mm,
blah."
mm,
And I said, "Oh, did you know that?"
mm,
And you could see the connection then, the teacher going, "Oh my God, we just presumed ba meant bedroom, that he was
yeah,
requesting to go back. That's all we presumed it meant." And actually, that
mm,
was one of his only vocalizations. So it could have meant all sorts of things. And in
yes,
that moment, giving him, it wasn't the "I want the bus," but it was like,
mm,
what's happened to the bus? Like, we
yes,
were meant to go on the bus. Where is the bus? Why am
mm,
I in class? In
yeah,
that moment, then she was like, "Oh my God, I should have written a social story, or I should have done something to inform." And I just think they're those moments, aren't they, where we presume
mm,
what an individual wants to say. And
mm,
we presume it's often a request because of this legacy stuff. And actually, if we
mm,
start to challenge that and see autistic children as wanting to share comments, share their experiences, share their ideas, share jokes and humor, and be able to describe things and have
mm,
conversations and play games and all of these things that I think historically that legacy stuff has kind of lent into, we just want them to be able to ask for what they want.
mm,
And I
mm,
get that, because for children who struggle with communication, often if the communication is behavior that hurts themselves or other people, you want to know in that moment what is
mm,
driving that behavior, right? And if it's
mm,
something that they want that they can't get to show
mm,
you and they don't have the language, then I can understand where it comes from about wants and needs.
mm.
But I think sometimes we can get a bit stuck on that and actually think if we
Yes.
focus on connection and
Mm,
joy, we might find a way into understanding a little bit more that child's experiences in the moment, that it might not actually be for something that they want. It could be something internally. It could be, where's the bus? Why is
yeah.
that not happening? And that isn't something that that child wanted in that moment. He was really distressed, but it
Mm,
wasn't because he wanted to go, wanted the bus. It's because he was wondering
mm,
what the heck happened to it.
yeah.
And so
Yes.
I think there's that piece, isn't there?
Yes, yes. And something that I sort of think about with AAC, I've been talking to an adult AAC user a lot. We've been sort of like sharing a lot of emails, and the insights that I've been getting from her have just been incredible. And she has described her AAC as sort of like being an external brain. So she sometimes
Right.
explores her thoughts through her AAC, because she doesn't have an internal voice. I think some AAC users definitely do have an internal voice, but she
Mm,
says that she doesn't. So she doesn't actually always know what she's thinking until she has a little fiddle around with her AAC by herself. So it's not for anybody else as such in those moments. It's just to gather her thoughts or develop her thoughts. Um, and I see this a lot in the children that I work with, that their parents will say, oh, yeah, sometimes they take themselves off into a little corner and I hear them just exploring and saying things to themselves. And I think that's an underused or undervalued part of AAC use, that sometimes it is just for it is for exploring thoughts, exploring language, making connections between things, and that's really valid. Like, I celebrate if a child is exploring their AAC by themselves. I think
mm,
previously we might have dismissed that a bit. Like, I've certainly heard people worry they're just pressing buttons, saying things like that. They're just pressing
mm.
buttons, or they're repeat pressing. They're just saying the same thing over and over and over again. And I think we probably have said this before on the podcast, that is really valid exploration of the
Mm.
language that's on there. And if we hear that, then we're absolutely delighted.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting, isn't it, that I was actually in a class this week with a young person doing some AAC work, and he'd got it and he typed the. And it was so interesting because they were in threes, and it was like
Ah,
and then and then back to And I kind of just went, oh, and I just repeated what he'd said because I thought, I'm not
mm,
sure this is for me. This isn't like
mm,
a, hey, Ruth, look at this, or like, look at this
mm,
thing over here, or I'm telling you something. And it might have been, but I just didn't get that sense,
mm.
in that moment when you're kind of tuned into someone. And he just looked at me and smiled and then just deleted it and went on. But I thought, how interesting. Like, and I
Yeah,
think that's that sort of thing, isn't it? Where there's communication practice and then there's
yeah,
communication actually happening.
yeah,
And when
yes.
it's that kind of more intentional, I'm giving you a message that I want you to receive and
Mm,
understand,
mm,
versus those moments where you do just see a bit of exploration. And I suppose, like, thinking about how we differentiate between what is a reason for communication and what is more of that self-regulatory,
mm,
exploratory, processing language.
mm, mm.
And a lot of that comes down to knowing the individual, doesn't it? And really tuning in to them. And I
Yeah,
think that's quite a
yeah,
complex thing within therapy, to know
yes.
which bits to respond to and which bits to notice,
Yes.
but maybe take a different response as the communication partner.
Yes, and you have to be in relationship with that child, don't you, to sort
Mhm,
of get to know their patterns or their preferences, and I think increasingly we are allowed to talk about sort of like our gut instincts or our intuition in speech and language therapy. I think, previously it's been very much, we only talk about observable behaviors, and
yeah.
I think we're moving away from that, thank goodness, that we are allowed to like deeply relate to another human being in speech and language therapy,
Mm,
and sort of do all of those things that are quite intangible, like reading the mood in the room, or sensing where a person's energy is at that in that
mhm,
moment.
yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting area um that we will explore more, I think, over the next few years in speech and language therapy. Um, but I think the point that I was trying to make there, sorry, I'm very, very going off on tangents today. The point that I was probably trying to make there was, it's really important for us to get to know AAC users well, if we are
Yeah.
supporting them, that you can sort of make that call more confidently if you know them well. compared to if you're just meeting them
Yeah.
for the first time. You might not be able to tell, oh, that actually was just for themselves. That wasn't meant for me. But over time and getting to know a child, I think you can get that sense of, through their body language, through their postures, through their positioning, through, general signs of regulation. I think that can help us to sense whether that was for us or not.
Mm. Yeah, and I think also as you get to know them, you get to know their signs of intention. You know,
Mm,
they're like, is it a
mm,
little bit of a side eye or a little bit of a nudge,
mm,
or do they sort of move
mm.
the device towards you? You know, those bits where they're like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is, come on now, this is for you, whatever it
Yes,
is that I'm
yes.
saying. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is that if you don't give an individual access to enough words and enough kind of opportunities and reasons for communication, you don't get connection
Mm,
because you're
mm.
looking at them going, I expect something from you. I expect you to now request this thing. And when they do it, you go, oh, here's this thing. And then almost like the moment's gone. Like it's very transactional.
Kind of ruined the connection, haven't you? As soon as we've got an agenda, as soon as we have an expectation for what someone is going to say, the whole interest in communication just evaporates, doesn't it? Um,
Yeah.
I remember someone when my eldest daughter was very small. If she had been caring for my daughter that day, when I went to pick her up, she would say to my daughter, "Tell mummy about how we la 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 la," and she'd basically tell me before my daughter was expected to tell me. So my daughter was expected to just repeat basically what this person had said. And she wasn't interested in that at all. You could see the sort of like interest drain from her body. And I think that, that would be the same in any communication situation. It's sort of like passing an exam, isn't it? If you remember back to like taking a French oral exam or German oral exam, and you know that they want you to say a very predefined script, and it's just not interesting.
Hmm.
It's there's no joy in that interaction
Yeah.
if you think that the person already knows what you're going to say or expects you to say something that actually wasn't your genuine thought.
Yeah, and that becomes stuck. Like I can even remember my French oral exam now, like bonjour, je m'appelle Ruth, j'habite à Sheffield, and then I went on to talk
Mm.
about how it was a green city or something because it was just drilled in. It wasn't
Yeah.
communication for joy, it was just
Yes.
drilled and it was
Yeah.
expected. And I
Mm.
think that's the thing that's if we focus solely on requesting, it becomes a bit of a drill and it becomes a bit
Mm.
of an expectation, like, oh, here we go again. Yeah, there's the
Mm.
symbols. Can I have my snack now, please?
Mm. Mm.
Um, Whereas if we think about communication for, asking questions, I was
Mhm.
working again this week, just this week, and saying to a child who took their socks off, and they like took their socks off, and I was just like, oh, and I got the device. I was like, where are you going to put those? And then they put them in their boots, and I went, oh, in your boots. I'm not modeling there that he needed to request anything. I'm
Mm.
just been like, I'm modeling a question, I'm modeling
Yeah.
a comment of a preposition, like there's some
Mm.
labeling. And then he took them off and he put his feet on the floor and wiggled his toes, and I went, oh, I like that, like just that preference. And so I think even in that moment, you can model a few different reasons
Mhm.
for communication. So I
Mm.
think if we're thinking about AAC, we've got to be thinking about what reasons are meaningful to
Yeah.
communicate for and what
Mhm.
language are we giving an individual. So if it's paper based, making sure you've maybe got a few pages for different reasons. If you're
Mm.
looking in an AAC device that's an app, where is the meaningful vocab, not
Mhm.
just the requesty vocab? And how do
Mm.
we use things like in Grid? You've got messages, haven't you? You've got quick
Yeah.
fires in TD Snap, like things
Mm.
that you could program that are just a moment of communication that is
Yes.
just
Yeah.
grounded in something that's connecting and meaningful.
Yes, and sort of family fun sayings are nice to include,
Mm,
aren't they? So, like all families have different ways of checking in with each other, or like favorite sayings, or maybe a favorite song or something, and that's really nice to include in the AAC. Or some like real silly things, like if we are talking about young children. young children just like to say really silly things, things that kind of just feel nice in their mouth to say. So yeah,
Yeah,
some of that,
yeah.
or sound nice. Some of that just a complete almost nonsense stuff, but that is just fun and delightful, and it does mean
Mhm.
something to the people sharing that language, because it's like, how they connect and how they essentially they're sort of communicating, I see you, I hear you, we're in this together. That kind of language can be really nice to have a think about and include some of that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think kind of just thinking about um, what are the reasons for communication,
Mm,
and we've talked
mm,
a lot about them today. But actually, if you do a quick Google search, or the search engines are available, but if you do a quick search, you would be able to find a the means, reasons, and opportunities model, and it will give you that list of reasons and ideas. There's also, again, if you search for the I can do more than request, there's a really lovely like diagram within the middle, like communication, and it goes off on all these different branches with lots
mm,
of then little bits coming off it of all the different reasons to communicate. So actually, if I can find it, I'll put that in the show notes so people
mm,
can
yeah.
click through to those. So thinking a little bit about our glimmers for this week.
Mm.
Um, I've got a couple. Have you got one that's at the forefront of your
I
mind, or
Yes,
shall I
I
jump straight
do.
in?
This one was a couple of days
Oh,
ago, so it's my the newest child that I'm working with. So this was session 2, and we've just been modeling a few bits and pieces from the iPad, and this is a quite typical scenario. So this is a very young child, like 3.5. The first time children come to my therapy space, um, very understandably, they're often dysregulated because they don't know what's going to happen. Like they've never been here before. They often want to explore the space and see what's behind other closed doors and stuff, and sometimes that's fine. And sometimes they kind of like want to finish before the end. So I'm always, at pains to say to parents, like, we can finish early. That is fine, because I don't want this child to feel as though they're imprisoned, first of all, and they're being held against their will, that they have agency, and that this has been a positive experience. So, I want them to come back the second time feeling like this is a space that I can be myself and that people listen to me. So this was a child's second time. The first time that we had finished slightly early because they'd clearly communicated by going to the door and pulling their mum's hand that they wanted to go. So this was only the second session, and we were kind of like exploring the room a bit more and pulling things out of the drawers, pulling toys out of the drawers. And this child's mum knew that he really likes colours and sorting colours, so she had found a little stick container where you put like the red stick through the red hole and the blue stick through the blue hole, and this child really got into that. And so I was just modelling colours. I'd gone to the colours page and was just modelling that. And this child had been sort of glancing throughout the session when I'd modelled things, like definitely turning his head to look when I was modelling things on the AAC. So I'd been saying to his mum, "Oh, that's brilliant. He's turning his head and looking already." Um, and then when we were doing this colour thing, he just sort of like turned to the iPad and noticed that they had the colours on that page, and just had a lovely little explore, really deliberately going through the colours, and just you could feel this little, oh, that's exciting, it's going up to the sentence bar, so when I press red, then red appears in the sentence bar. And the mum like got quite tearful over it, because it was the first like insight of like what's going on in his head, like the sort of like learning and processing that he's doing, and just that lovely recognition. He's really interested in this, and this is really exciting. So yeah, that was my little glimmer of the week, I would say.
oh, I love that. My glimmer is it's a bit it is It's a really interesting one, and it's somebody that I have connected with on Instagram, who is a parent who is introducing AAC, and I've had so many wonderful messages over time, and I just got another one this week, which is what sort of prompted it to be in my mind of how this is a parent who has got some speech therapy support, but it is very limited, has thought, I want to introduce AAC.
Mm.
And their child is now speaking more and like
Mhm.
generating quite like novel, spontaneous
Mhm.
language. They're putting things together that she's kind of having to work out what she means, because maybe is like using a word that semantically is similar but isn't quite, the
Mm.
like the castle, but they meant
Mhm.
the, I don't know, restaurant or something, those kind
Mhm.
of things, like using slightly different words for different things. And it's just been so lovely. And it's one thing I
Mm.
really love about social media is to like have this experience where it's just sharing really the
Uh,
positive impact of AAC, but
mm.
also to see a parent feeling so empowered,
Uh,
like they might ask the odd
mm.
question on messages and things, but just and the impact that that is having
Yeah.
for that child, because
Yes.
somebody's kind of had that, because the parents had that capacity to just give something a go, and it's just been so
Yes.
joyful, like the little messages coming through of like, oh, she said this today, or oh, press this, or oh, she didn't, which is really lovely, really
Yes.
lovely. Thank you so much for our chat today, all about the reasons for communication. I will put those bits in the show notes, so people can go and have a look, and we will see you all next time for the next episode of AAC Access All Areas.
Thank you. Bye bye.